Welcome to From Dorms to Desks, job hunting tips for those early in their careers, a podcast brought to you by College Recruiter job search site, which believes that every student and recent grad deserves a great career, and hosted by Work Defined. Join our AI co-hosts as they dive into tips, tricks, and insights that will help you land your next part-time, seasonal, internship, or entry-level job. Let's get your career started.
So we have this deeply ingrained assumption about how careers are supposed to work.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a universally accepted narrative.
Exactly. A narrative we've all basically just treated as gospel over the last, decade or so. And that assumption is that momentum is just the default state of the professional world.
Mm-hmm. Always moving forward.
Right. I mean, you just look back at the era of the Great Resignation, which was really just a few years ago, and the defining characteristic of the entire workforce was this, kinetic energy.
Oh, absolutely. It was constant motion.
Yeah, people were basically treating their careers like a high-frequency trading floor. Constantly moving, constantly leveraging one role into a slightly better one.
Always chasing that next bump in salary.
Yeah. Better pay, remote work, or, just chasing a more profound sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the workforce today, sitting here in 2026, that kinetic energy has just completely evaporated.
It really has. It's totally gone.
The momentum has completely stopped. We are looking at a workforce that has, collectively decided to just freeze in place.
Yeah, it is a massive structural contraction. And what's wild is that it's happening entirely at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with this phenomenon that analysts are now officially calling the Great Stay.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is the underlying motive behind it.
Right, because it's not what you'd think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This sudden immobility, this freezing, it isn't being driven by some sudden surge in corporate loyalty.
Oh, definitely not.
And it's not a miraculous spike in job satisfaction either. It is strictly a defensive posture. It's driven almost entirely by this profound, really pervasive desire for safety in an economic environment that just feels inherently volatile.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sources we're looking at for today's deep dive, they paint a picture of a workforce that is prioritizing pure survival over literally everything else.
Yes, survival at all costs.
Right. So our primary roadmap for this discussion is this really phenomenal analysis by Dr. Jasmine Escalera. She's a career expert at My Perfect Resume. And this piece was recently published by College Recruiter.
It's a fantastic breakdown.
It really is. Now, I want to be super clear on our mission for you today, because there are plenty of platforms analyzing this trend from, a top-down perspective.
Right. The macro view.
Exactly. Like if you listen to the High Volume Hiring podcast, which that's actually part of the same College Recruiter network, you'll hear these totally fascinating discussions about what the Great Stay means for macro-level talent acquisition.
Yeah, like how HR departments are managing bottlenecked retention and enterprise-scale strategies.
Right, exactly. But that is the corporate view. And that is absolutely not our mission today. Our mission is entirely micro. We are laser-focused on what this specific economic climate means for you.
Mm-hmm. The individual navigating this crazy landscape.
Yes. We are looking at the deeply personal calculus of balancing your own job security against your career growth, your mental bandwidth, and, frankly, your lifetime earning potential.
And that micro focus is just so essential right now because, the macro data actually masks a tremendous amount of individual friction.
How so?
Well, think about it. When an HR department sees their retention numbers stabilizing or they see turnover dropping to these record lows, they almost always flag that as a huge metric of success.
Right, they're high-fiving in the boardroom, the dashboard glows green.
Exactly, the green light is on. But when you apply Dr. Escalera's analysis to those exact same numbers, you quickly realize the green light is actually a warning siren.
Oh, wow, that's a great way to put it.
People aren't staying because they're thriving. I mean, they're staying because they are trapped by a very specific psychological narrative about the market right now.
Right, a narrative of fear.
Totally. They're enduring profound unhappiness, severe burnout, and just a total misalignment with their own career goals. And why? Simply because the perceived risk of leaving massively outweighs the guaranteed pain of staying.
Yeah, it really reminds me of that behavioral economics concept of loss aversion. but
Yeah.
like dialed all the way up to an existential level.
Yeah, 100%. It's survival mode.
Right. And my working theory here, as I was reading through the source material, is that the current job market operates exactly like a game of musical chairs.
Okay, I like this.
But, you know, the music is actually still playing. The rules of engagement have just completely warped. So instead of walking around the chairs, sizing them up, looking for a better position, everyone has just abruptly sat down.
Just slammed into the nearest seat.
Yes. And they are gripping the sides of their current chair with totally white knuckles, absolutely terrified to stand up.
Because they know what might happen if they do.
Exactly. I mean, they know the chair they're in is wobbly. They know it's incredibly uncomfortable. But the overarching fear is that if they stand up to try and find a better seat, the music is going to abruptly stop while they're in transit.
And they'll be left completely empty-handed.
Right. They'll be left entirely without a place in the economy. So they sit and they endure.
That analogy is so perfect because it captures the exact tension between perceived risk and actual risk.
Yeah.
The fear of being caught without a chair, being laid off during a transition or facing a brutal hiring market, it completely overrides all of their other professional instincts.
Right. Logic just goes out the window.
Exactly. And to really understand the architecture of this fear, we have to look closely at the data Dr. Escalera pulled from My Perfect Resume's The Great Stay 2026 report.
Yes, the numbers here are pretty stark.
They are. There's one specific metric that really serves as the psychological anchor for everything we're going to talk about today. 32% of employees explicitly state they are actively worried about losing their jobs this year.
Okay, wait. 32%. That is nearly a third of the entire workforce.
Yes, almost 1 in 3 people.
That isn't just some fringe anxiety among low performers. That is a systemic ambient dread.
Ambient dread is exactly what it is.
I mean, think about the practical application of that. If you walk into a typical strategy meeting with 10 people, 3 of them aren't even dedicating their full cognitive bandwidth to the quarterly projections or the client pitch.
Not at all.
Their internal monologue is entirely consumed by a threat assessment. They are sitting there actively wondering if their badge is going to work when they show up on Monday morning.
And you have to realize that level of ambient threat fundamentally alters human behavior.
Right. It changes how you operate day to day.
It absolutely does. When an individual is operating under the active assumption that their livelihood is in immediate jeopardy, they default to what psychologists call career preservation mode.
Career preservation mode. Okay, tell me what that actually looks like in practice.
Well, it's a highly specific behavioral adaptation. The entire objective of preservation mode is simply to minimize the target on your back.
So flying under the radar.
Exactly. You stop volunteering for high visibility, high stakes projects because, visibility implies accountability, and accountability carries the risk of very visible failure.
Right. And failure means you get fired.
In their minds, yes. So you stop pitching innovative ideas because innovation inherently disrupts the status quo. And when you are terrified, the status quo feels like armor. You consciously, deliberately make the choice to stop rocking the boat.
I mean, I see the logic of the survival mechanism there. It makes sense on paper. But I really have to challenge the actual efficacy of this so-called safety.
Yo.
How so?
But if we look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology, this preservation mode is basically just a threat rigidity response.
Right, the freeze response. Yeah. An animal senses a predator, so it freezes in place. It hopes that by remaining completely motionless, it's going to blend into the background and the predator will just walk on past. But the corporate environment is not a forest, and layoffs are not predators that hunt based on movement.
That is a very good point.
Right. If you're freezing in place, if you're adopting this protective crouch and doing only the absolute bare minimum just to avoid drawing attention, you are actively eroding the very value proposition that keeps you employed in the first place.
You're making yourself useless, basically.
Exactly. You might feel safe because you aren't making mistakes, but you also aren't making an impact. Aren't workers essentially tricking themselves, like miscalculating the actual nature of the risk?
They are. They're making a deeply, deeply flawed risk assessment. The illusion of safety in the modern corporation is almost entirely tied to the steady paycheck.
Right, as long as the money hits the account on the 15th and the 30th.
Exactly. As long as that direct deposit clears, the preservation strategy feels validated to them. But Dr. Escalera's analysis points out something crucial.
What's that?
Prioritizing this specific passive flavor of safety comes at the direct expense of forward momentum. You are basically optimizing for today's survival while completely bankrupting tomorrow's viability.
Oh, wow. Bankrupting tomorrow's viability. That's a heavy way to put it, but it's true.
It is.
Yeah.
And the friction between the human nervous system's demand for safety, which is constantly screaming stay hidden, and the professional mandate for growth, which inherently requires risk and visibility, it creates this totally unsustainable internal pressure.
Which brings us perfectly to the first massive structural consequence of the Great Stay. I mean, think about holding a physical crouch for 8 hours a day.
Oh, your muscles would be screaming.
Exactly. You are going to experience catastrophic fatigue. So in the professional realm, if you are operating in a state of constant low-grade existential dread, while simultaneously suppressing your natural human drive for growth,
it's a recipe for disaster.
It creates an incredibly specific, compounding form of exhaustion. We are talking about the reality of modern burnout.
And honestly, the data on this is arguably the most alarming part of the entire analysis.
Yeah.
The source material references this Burnout Nation report, and the metrics are just staggering.
Let's hear them.
63% of workers report experiencing burnout several times a week.
Wait, several times a week, not a month.
Several times a week. We really have to internalize what that actually means. More than 6 out of every 10 professionals you interact with are hitting a profound psychological and physical wall multiple times within a standard 5-day work week.
That's just wild.
It gets worse. Furthermore, 55% of workers categorize their burnout as moderate to severe.
So we aren't just talking about, the standard Friday afternoon fatigue where you maybe need an extra cup of coffee to get through a boring spreadsheet.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the vast majority of the workforce operating in a state of clinical, moderate to severe cognitive depletion, like as their baseline normal.
Precisely. That is their everyday reality. And the really critical insight from Dr. Escalera's work here is that burnout, especially in the context of the Great Stay, is not a static condition.
Meaning it doesn't just stay at one level.
Right. It is a compounding phenomenon. When you are trapped in a role purely out of fear, the burnout doesn't just plateau at a manageable moderate level. It actively worsens over time, which creates this incredibly dangerous feedback loop.
I see where this is going.
Right. So that preservation mode we discussed earlier, where you're doing the bare minimum, it's very often misinterpreted by management.
Yeah, management always gets this wrong.
They see it as a sudden lack of ambition, or they think it's a negative shift in the employee's attitude.
Right. The classic corporate response is to label that person as quiet quitting.
Yeah.
Or they accuse them of losing their drive. Management looks at that drop in discretionary effort and just assumes it's a character flaw, like a deliberate rebellion against the company.
Which is a complete, total misdiagnosis of the actual biological mechanism at play. Doing the bare minimum under these highly specific economic conditions is actually a symptom of sheer cognitive bankruptcy.
Cognitive bankruptcy, I love that term.
It is a biological survival mechanism. Look, the brain is allocating so much background processing power to managing the chronic anxiety of potential job loss and to suppressing the deep frustration of feeling stuck, that there is literally no executive function left over for discretionary effort. The cognitive RAM is totally maxed out just running those background stress protocols.
Yeah.
You simply do not have the bandwidth to innovate or to perform at a high level.
I really want to isolate how this impacts different demographics, though, because the article makes a very specific point to emphasize the unique danger this poses to early career professionals.
Yes, the early career stage is incredibly vulnerable here.
Right, because if you are, say, 15 or 20 years into a career, you have this deep reservoir of expertise. You have established networks, you have muscle memory for your core tasks.
You could do your job in your sleep.
Exactly. And frankly, you have the political capital within the company to just coast for a quarter or two without anyone really noticing a massive dip in your output. You can weather a period of preservation mode, but if you're in the first 3 to 5 years of your career, you do not have that reservoir.
You really don't.
Okay.
The early career stage is entirely dependent on neuroplasticity and rapid skill acquisition.
Yes.
Those first few years, they are the very foundation upon which the entire trajectory of your professional life is built. You're supposed to be a sponge.
Right, soaking everything up.
Aggressively absorbing methodologies, building a tolerance for complex problem solving, learning how to navigate different leadership styles. But a sponge that is already completely saturated with the cortisol of chronic burnout cannot absorb any new information.
That makes total sense.
If you hit severe compounding burnout in year 2 of your career and you stay in that role purely out of fear of the market, you are effectively halting your professional development before it has even achieved escape velocity.
Oh, wow.
I'd like to introduce the Boom Band Showcase. My name is Jeff Taylor. I'm the host of the show. I'm the founder of Monster.com and Boom Band. This is a podcast about job seekers. They're struggling right now. The ghosted jobs, the black hole, everything is challenging. What we want to do is create real stories, get them talking about their superpowers, have you see what they're really like, because you're going to want to hire them. Give me a sign that you love your life.
You are actively stunting your capacity to handle higher order challenges later on in life.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because the architecture of this entire phenomenon starts to look like a massive paradox. Let's trace the behavioral loop we've just established.
Okay, let's walk through it.
Step 1. An employee looks at the market, they feel terrified of layoffs, and they decide to hunker down in their current role to guarantee their safety.
Right. The great stay begins.
Step 2. The friction of staying in a role they have completely outgrown, combined with that ambient anxiety of the market, it induces moderate to severe burnout.
The compounding drain.
Step 3. The burnout completely depletes their cognitive bandwidth, which forces them into preservation mode, where their performance drops to the absolute bare minimum required to not be fired on a Tuesday.
Okay, yes. That is the exact sequence.
So my hypothesis here is that this whole strategy is actively self-destructive.
Let's hear it.
Think about it. If a company suddenly faces a revenue contraction and they have to execute, let's say, a 10% reduction in force, they pull the performance data, they look at velocity, impact, and visibility.
Exactly what management does.
Right. So the employee who has spent the last 8 months in preservation mode, doing the bare minimum, actively avoiding visibility, generating literally zero new value, that person is going to be at the absolute top of the CFO's spreadsheet for termination.
Yep. They painted a target on themselves.
Doesn't the very behavior designed to prevent job loss actually mathematically increase the probability of being laid off?
It absolutely does. And that is the true tragic irony of the great stay. You are engineering the exact outcome you are desperately trying to avoid.
It's crazy.
By optimizing for invisibility, you completely destroy your utility to the organization. When the macroeconomic weather turns genuinely bad, the only true job security is being indispensable.
Being the person that can't afford to lose?
Exactly. And you become indispensable by solving hard problems, demonstrating agility, and maintaining high visibility among the decision makers.
Right.
Burned out employees who are operating in a protective crouch have literally none of those attributes. They have systematically stripped away their own armor in this totally misguided attempt to hide from the battle.
It's just a devastating miscalculation of how corporate leverage actually works. You trade your actual leverage, which is your high performance and your growth, for the mere illusion of safety.
A very expensive illusion.
And extremely expensive. And, the toll isn't just psychological or physiological. The source material pivots from the mental cost to the literal quantifiable price tag of this paralysis.
The financial impact is huge.
Let's examine the financial architecture of the Great Stay. Because when you freeze your career progression, you are also freezing your earning potential. And we live in a world where the cost of living is decidedly not frozen.
No, it certainly isn't. And the financial data paints a very, very stark picture of what this holding pattern actually costs an individual. According to the research, only 23% of workers are currently satisfied with their pay.
23%. So almost everyone is unhappy with their paycheck.
Exactly. That implies a massive majority feel undercompensated. But the truly alarming metric is the stagnation factor. 41% of workers report they have not received a meaningful raise in the past 2 years.
41%. We are looking at nearly half the workforce accepting a functional freeze in their compensation. And we really have to define meaningful here, because a standard 2 or 3% annual cost of living adjustment,
which most companies barely even do anymore.
Right, exactly. But even if they do, that is often wiped out entirely by inflation or, rising healthcare premiums. It doesn't actually increase your purchasing power. It barely maintains it.
And often it flat out fails to maintain it. The article brilliantly connects this micro-level pay stagnation to macro-level life trajectories.
Yeah, the big picture stuff.
Right. We so often compartmentalize our salary. We view it as an isolated variable, like it's just a number on a W-2 that dictates our monthly budget for groceries and rent. But Dr. Escalera's framework forces us to recognize that your compensation trajectory is actually the primary engine for major adult life milestones.
It's the fuel for your life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you voluntarily accept a multi-year freeze in meaningful wage growth just to maintain job security, you are systematically delaying your entire adult timeline.
I think we need to make that incredibly concrete for you listening right now. What does that delay actually look like in practice? Give me some examples.
It looks like the inability to aggressively pay down high-interest student loans, which means you are paying exponentially more over the life of that debt because of the interest.
Right.
It looks like the indefinite postponement of building a 6-month emergency fund, which, ironically, makes you even more vulnerable to the very job loss you fear so much.
Oh, man, the irony there is painful.
It really is. It delays the transition from renting a shared space to actual home ownership. It drastically reduces the capital you can deploy into retirement accounts or investment portfolios during the most critical years of compound growth.
Yeah, those early years are vital for compounding.
You are pushing the horizon line of your financial independence further and further away with literally every single month you remain stagnant.
If we focus again on the early to mid-career professional, the math here gets genuinely frightening. Because in your 20s and 30s, the largest leaps in compensation rarely come from internal annual reviews.
Very true.
They come from strategic job hopping, or they come from leveraging an external offer for a massive internal promotion. You are looking at 15, 20, sometimes 30% jumps in base salary when you change roles.
Those are the wealth-building moves.
Right. So if you succumb to the great stay and you skip 2 of those strategic moves over, say, a 5-year period, you aren't just losing the $10,000 extra dollars you would have made this year.
Not at all. You are completely resetting the baseline for every subsequent percentage-based raise you will get for the rest of your life.
Yes. The baseline shifts.
The opportunity cost is staggering. The compounding nature of salary growth means that a 20% bump that you miss at age 28 mathematically translates to hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost aggregate wealth by age 65.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yes. The structural reality of the corporate world is that loyalty is rarely compensated at the same premium as external acquisition. Employers pay market rate to acquire new talent, but they only pay marginal increments to retain their existing talent.
So what does this all mean? It's the ultimate invisible tax.
Let's construct an analogy to really anchor this concept for the listener.
I love your analogies. Let's hear it.
Okay, staying in a stagnant role purely for the feeling of safety is functionally identical to taking your entire life savings in cash and just stuffing it under a mattress.
Oh, that's good. Right. Psychologically, it feels unassailably safe. You can lift the mattress, you can look at the cash, and you know it's exactly where you left it. Nobody can hack your mattress. Nobody can fire your mattress. The nominal value, the actual number printed on the bills, it remains constant. But there is a silent, relentless force operating in the background. In the real economy, that force is inflation. In our career analogy, that force is compounding opportunity costs.
Exactly, the invisible drain.
Every single day that money sits under the mattress, its actual purchasing power is eroding. You think you are executing a perfect defensive strategy, protecting your assets from the volatility of the stock market, but you are actually guaranteeing a mathematical loss of value over time.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it, because the nominal value of your job, meaning the fact that you simply possess the title and the baseline salary that remains intact.
You still have a job.
But the actual utility of that job, in terms of building future wealth, achieving financial autonomy, funding your life goals, that utility is shrinking rapidly. You are actively paying a massive premium in the form of lost lifetime earnings simply to rent the feeling of security.
To rent the feeling of security. Wow. And, if your financial trajectory is flatlining and your cognitive bandwidth is completely depleted by burnout, it is a virtual certainty that your professional development has also completely ground to a halt.
They are entirely interconnected.
You can't separate these variables. They operate as a single ecosystem. Which brings us to the third major structural consequence identified in Dr. Escalera's analysis, this epidemic of detachment and the severe stunting of professional mobility.
The source material highlights a metric here that really bridges the gap between the psychological side and the practical side. 36% of workers state they feel detached at work.
Over a third.
Yes. And they specifically cite a lack of career growth as the direct catalyst for that detachment.
Detached is a very clinical-sounding word, but the actual lived experience of it is profoundly bleak.
It's depressing.
It really implies a total severing of the psychological contract between the employee and the work itself. You are physically logging in, your status indicator on Slack is green, you are moving the mouse around.
But nobody is home.
Exactly. Emotionally and intellectually, you have completely vacated the premises. You are basically a ghost in your own career.
You've initiated a psychological divorce from the organization, but you just refuse to move out of the house.
Yes.
And the reason this detachment is so toxic to long-term career viability is that professional mobility, meaning the ability to navigate upward and laterally across the industry, that is the only true security in the modern economy.
Right. Not a job title. Mobility.
Exactly. Dr. Escalera breaks down the engine of this mobility into 3 foundational building blocks: gaining new skills, gaining new experiences, and focusing on visibility. If you are operating in a state of detachment, you're categorically failing to acquire any of those 3 elements.
Let's really break those down, because if you are detached, you are certainly not raising your hand to master the new AI tool the company is rolling out. So you fail to gain the new skill.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't volunteering to cross-train with the product team on some difficult, complex launch, so you miss out on the new experience. And naturally, because you are avoiding the difficult launch and ignoring the new tools, your visibility to the executive team drops to absolute 0.
Exactly. You are coasting entirely on your legacy knowledge. And Dr. Escalera introduces a really vital temporal framework here. She calls the 3 to 5 year trajectory.
Okay, tell me about that.
The fundamental question you have to ask yourself is, does your current daily work actively push you toward where you need to be in the market 3 to 5 years from now?
Right, because the market isn't standing still.
No, the market is highly dynamic. If your current role is just a neutral holding pattern, if it isn't constantly challenging you, if it isn't forcing you to adapt to new methodologies, it is actively diminishing your future competitiveness. While you are sitting still, terrified to move, the industry is accelerating, the tools are evolving, the paradigms of leadership are shifting.
I really want to explore the mechanics of this decay because it leads to a very, very specific trap. Let's use a biological metaphor this time.
Okay, I'm ready.
Look at the Galapagos finches, right? Darwin's finches. They flew to these isolated islands and they hyper-adapted to incredibly specific niche environments.
Right, the different beach shape.
Exactly. One finch evolved a beak perfectly designed to crack exactly one type of seed that only grew on one specific island. In that closed ecosystem, they were apex survivors. But if you took that finch and dropped it back on the mainland,
it would die.
It would starve to death instantly because its hyperspecialization made it entirely incapable of general survival. I see this exact phenomenon happen to professionals who succumb to the great stay for too long. They become institutionalized.
That is the perfect word for it. Institutionalized.
Let's say you stay at a mid-sized logistics company for 7 years, purely out of fear of the market. You become an absolute master of their highly specific, utterly unique internal ecosystem. You know exactly how to navigate their clunky proprietary database that was custom built in 2014.
Yep, the one that crashes every Tuesday.
Yeah, right. You know the precise political alchemy of which 3 vice presidents need to be blind copied on an email just to bypass procurement delays. You become the absolute most efficient operator within the 4 walls of that specific company. But not a single one of those hyper-adapted skills is transferable to the outside world.
You become a legacy system yourself. You're highly optimized for an environment that literally does not exist anywhere else in the economy. And this is the absolute most dangerous consequence of the great stay. The longer you remain in that fearful holding pattern, the more entrenched you become in those non-transferable hyperlocal skills. The real tragedy is that you usually don't realize the atrophy has occurred until you are finally forced out into the open market.
Right, when the illusion shatters.
Whether you finally find the courage to leave or a sudden restructuring forces you out, you enter the interview process and you realize your resume is tacked with achievements and operational efficiencies that mean absolutely nothing to a hiring manager at a modern dynamic company. Your mobility hasn't just been paused, it has been fundamentally stunted.
Looking for the inside scoop on payroll? Whether you're a payroll pro or just curious about your paycheck, we've got 2 podcasts you cannot miss. It's About Payroll delivers the latest trends for payroll pros, and It's About Your Paycheck is here for employees, breaking down pay and rights in simple terms. 2 great shows, 2 great hosts, and endless insights to keep you informed and empowered. Subscribe now and elevate your payroll knowledge. Brought to you by Work Defined, where payroll meets people.
Okay, so we have systematically deconstructed the nightmare scenario here. We've looked at the compounding cognitive drain of burnout. We've done the math on the devastating financial trap of stagnant pay and lost compounding interest. We've explored the evolutionary dead end of institutionalization and stunted mobility.
It's a lot of doom and gloom.
It is. And if we stop right here, the conclusion seems to be that staying in your job is just always a catastrophic error. But the source material is highly nuanced, and we really need to honor that nuance. Dr. Escalera explicitly states that staying isn't universally the wrong move.
It's not at all.
The critical challenge for you, the listener, is distinguishing between a strategic, intentional pause and a fear-based trap. So how do we build a framework to evaluate that difference?
This is where the analysis really shifts from diagnosing the pathology to prescribing a methodology for evaluation. The great stay only becomes a toxic trap when it is driven by unexamined fear.
Unexamined fear. Okay.
Dr. Escalera outlines specific, highly objective conditions where choosing to stay is actually the optimal strategic choice for your career. Staying is highly effective if your fundamental professional needs are being consistently met.
What defines those fundamental needs in her framework? Because needs can be pretty subjective.
She isolates 4 key variables: fair and market-aligned compensation, a manageable workload that actually respects boundaries, genuine and accessible learning opportunities, and a realistic, documented path forward within the organization structure.
Okay, so pay, boundaries, learning, and path.
Yes. If those 4 pillars are firmly in place, you aren't trapped in the great stay. You are operating in an incubator.
Ooh, an incubator. I really like that distinction because an incubator provides a controlled environment specifically designed for growth.
Precisely. Sometimes stability is the absolute most potent career asset you can leverage. A stable, equitable environment allows you to purposefully acquire complex, time-intensive skills that require deep, uninterrupted focus.
Skills you couldn't master if you were constantly stressed out.
Exactly. Skills you couldn't master if you were constantly trying to learn a new company's culture or stressing about job security. Furthermore, an incubator can provide the critical psychological safety required to recover from burnout sustained in a previous toxic role.
So using the stability to heal.
Yes. It allows you to rebuild your cognitive reserves so that when you do eventually decide to make your next move, you are doing so from a posture of absolute strength and intentionality, rather than just fleeing in a panic. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the defining characteristic here is agency. You are staying because it serves your long-term strategy, not because you are terrified of the alternative.
So the mandate for the listener right now is to figure out if they are sitting in an incubator or if they are sitting in a trap. And honestly, when you are in the thick of it, when the ambient anxiety of the market is just so loud, it is incredibly difficult to evaluate your own situation objectively.
It's almost impossible to see it clearly from the inside.
Right. We rationalize our comfort. We tell ourselves the pay is fine or the toxic boss is manageable. How does someone listening to this deep dive right now, maybe they're commuting to a job they feel ambivalent about, how do they actually execute that evaluation?
Dr. Escalera provides a phenomenal, highly tactical tool for this exact moment. It is a 4-question self-audit. And I strongly suggest that anyone listening right now doesn't just ponder these vaguely in their head. You actually need to write them down and force yourself to provide empirical answers.
All right, let's hear the audit. Give me question number 1.
Question number 1. Is this current role actively helping me grow professionally? Are you doing things today that you couldn't do 6 months ago?
Okay, that's straightforward. Growth. What's number 2?
Question number 2. Am I gaining skills that will directly translate and matter for my next role? We are looking past the current horizon line to the very next logical step in your career.
I love that one. Okay, question 3.
Question number 3. Does this specific job support my overarching financial and personal goals? Is the compensation actually allowing you to hit those milestones we discussed earlier?
Right. The house, the loans, the savings. Okay, and the final question.
Question number 4. Can I realistically map out tangible, upward progress within this organization in the next 1 to 3 years? What this audit does is it violently disrupts the preservation mindset. It shifts the locus of control away from the macroeconomic weather, which, remember, you cannot control, and places it squarely back on your own career portfolio, which you can control.
That second question is definitely the sharpest tool in the kit. Am I gaining skills that matter for my next role? It forces you to mentally step outside the building.
Mm-hmm.
It shatters that Galapagos Finch hyperadaptation we talked about because it demands that you look at the broader market requirements. But I want to pressure test this framework with a highly realistic scenario.
Bring it on.
Let's construct an avatar of a listener who perfectly embodies the data we discussed in Section 2. Let's say they run the audit. They ask the 4 questions, and the honest, empirical answer to all 4 is a definitive, crushing no.
Okay, a complete trap.
Right. They aren't growing, they aren't learning transferable skills, the pay is stagnant, and there's absolutely no upward path. Dr. Escalera's framework dictates that if the answers are no, the listener must immediately begin building an exit strategy.
Yes, that is the prescription.
Well, here is my core pushback. We established that 55% of these people are in moderate to severe burnout. Their cognitive RAM is at 0. They are barely surviving day to day.
True.
If you tell a profoundly depleted, highly anxious person that they now have to design, execute, and manage a comprehensive exit strategy, updating the resume, optimizing LinkedIn, tailoring cover letters, surviving multi-round behavioral interviews, negotiating salary.
It's exhausting just hearing you list it.
Exactly. Isn't that the exact kind of overwhelming monolithic pressure that forces them to retreat right back into the perceived safety of the trap? How does a person with literally 0 energy generate the escape velocity required to leave?
That is the central paradox of career mobility. And you have identified the exact friction point where most people simply abandon their search.
Yeah, they just give up.
The sheer activation energy required to initiate a full-scale job hunt from a standing start, while simultaneously carrying the weight of severe burnout, it feels physically insurmountable. It feels like launching a second, unpaid, highly stressful career.
Right. So what's the solution?
That crushing sense of overwhelm is precisely why Dr. Escalera's methodology does not prescribe an immediate full-scale job hunt.
Oh, it doesn't?
No. The source material provides a highly specific, exceptionally low-friction mechanism to begin constructing that exit strategy, without blowing up your life, without triggering an anxiety spiral, and without requiring a massive expenditure of your very limited cognitive reserves.
Okay, I'm leaning in. What is the mechanism?
That mechanism is networking.
Oh, come on. I have to stop you right there because I can physically feel the listeners wincing through the audio.
Yeah, I know.
The word networking carries so much negative baggage. For most professionals, especially introverts or those who are already exhausted, networking sounds like the exact opposite of low friction.
It has a terrible reputation.
It evokes this horrifying image of, putting on a stiff suit, going to a fluorescent-lit hotel conference room, wearing a "Hello, my name is" sticker, and aggressively thrusting physical business cards at strangers while drinking lukewarm coffee. It feels transactional, it feels awkward, and it is deeply exhausting.
We have to completely demolish that antiquated definition. The data demands that we look at networking through a totally modern, highly strategic lens.
Okay, hit me at the data.
The source material reveals one final, incontrovertible statistic that should fundamentally change how the listener allocates their limited energy. 54% of all workers are hired through a connection.
Over half.
More than half of the jobs in the modern economy completely bypass the cold application algorithm entirely. If you are burned out, blindly applying to hundreds of jobs through online portals is the highest friction, lowest yield activity you could possibly engage in. Your highest probability of success with the lowest expenditure of energy lies within your existing network.
So how do we redefine the behavior? If it isn't handing out business cards in a hotel lobby, what does modern low-friction networking actually look like for the exhausted professional?
We need to reframe networking as simple data gathering. Dr. Escalera is adamant that modern networking is not about begging your contacts for a job.
Right.
It is about seeking perspective. It is about asking for advice. It is about gently reminding your industry that you exist. And most crucially, for the listener with 0 bandwidth, it can be executed in micro-interactions.
Micro-interactions. Give me some examples of that.
You do not need to commit to a 45-minute Zoom interrogation. Starting small means 0 pressure touch points. It means spending exactly 3 minutes on LinkedIn to send a congratulatory message to a former classmate who just launched a new project.
Easy enough.
Right. It means sending a 2-line email to a past manager whose leadership you respected, simply asking what trends they are seeing in the market right now. It means logging into a virtual industry panel, leaving your camera completely off, listening to the discussion, and maybe just typing one thoughtful question into the chat box.
So it's incredibly low stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are not asking for a favor. You are simply reestablishing connective tissue. And the strategic brilliance of this approach is that maintaining these soft tethers to the outside market is absolutely essential, even if you ultimately decide to stay in your current role.
I really want to build on that reframing. We shouldn't even call it networking anymore. We should call it professional recon.
Professional recon, I like that a lot.
You are acting as a scout. You're gathering intelligence on the terrain outside your immediate perimeter. And if we connect this back to the profound psychological toll of the Great Stay, I think there is a therapeutic angle here that gets completely overlooked.
Mm-hmm. How so?
When you are trapped in a stagnant, unfulfilling, or potentially toxic workplace, your perception of reality becomes completely warped. The company culture becomes this massive echo chamber. You start internalizing the dysfunction.
You think it's normal.
Yes, you start thinking, maybe my skills aren't that valuable.
Right.
Maybe this is just how the entire industry operates now. Maybe everywhere else is just as bad, so I should just shut up and be grateful I have a paycheck.
Gaslighting yourself, essentially.
Exactly. My hypothesis is that a single 20-minute informational chat with a professional peer at a different company can completely shatter that reality distortion field.
Oh, without a doubt.
You hear how their team approaches problem solving. You hear the cadence of a healthy corporate culture. It acts as an immediate psychological reset. It reminds you that the dysfunction of your current employer is not an industry standard. It reminds you of your baseline value in the open market.
It pierces the bubble. It is an immediate antidote to the institutionalization we discussed earlier. You finally realize that your skills are, in fact, transferable, and that the wider ecosystem values things your current employer just completely takes for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And from a purely neurological standpoint, that realization generates a microdose of dopamine and hope.
Which is exactly what a burned-out person needs.
Precisely. Suddenly, the prospect of building a full exit strategy doesn't feel like an impossible mountain to climb. It feels like the natural continuation of a conversation you have already successfully initiated. The activation energy required to take that next step drops dramatically.
That is an incredibly empowering mechanism. It takes this massive, intimidating macroeconomic trend and scales it down to something you can literally execute from your couch with a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it puts the power back in your hands.
Yeah. As we pull the threads of this deep dive together, I think the overarching narrative Dr. Escalera has constructed is fundamentally about reclaiming agency. The Great Stay is undeniably the defining structural phenomenon of the 2026 workforce. It is the reality of the macro market.
You can't change it?
No. You cannot control the interest rates, you cannot control enterprise-level hiring freezes, and you cannot control the ambient anxiety of the economy. But this macro trend absolutely does not have to dictate your micro-reality.
This raises an important question, though. It entirely comes down to the intent behind your immobility. Choosing to stay in your current role because you deeply value the security, because you are actively incubating new skills, and because your core needs are actually being met, that is a highly valid, highly strategic decision.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, methodically planning an exit strategy because your self-audit revealed a dead end is an equally valid, courageous decision. The only true strategic failure, the only way the Great Stay actually defeats you, is if you abdicate your decision-making power to unexamined fear. If you let the ambient anxiety of the market make the choice for you, you essentially guarantee the decay of your own potential. Whether you are navigating your very first entry-level position right out of college, or you are managing a division in your 5th decade of work, the ultimate trajectory of your professional life remains firmly within your control.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought experiment to mull over today. Whether you are finishing up your commute right now, sitting at a desk you absolutely love, or staring at a screen you just can't wait to get away from, I want you to revisit that musical chairs analogy we opened with.
The one where everyone is terrified to stand up.
Exactly. Imagine that tomorrow morning you wake up and the music has stopped. But instead of a chaotic scramble for limited seats, the ambient fear of the market has completely vanished. The threat of layoffs is gone. The anxiety of the unknown is erased. You are operating in a completely fearless professional reality.
What a thought.
If fear was no longer a variable in your equation, what is the very first bold, uncompromising career move you would make? And more importantly, what is one tiny, absolutely risk-free piece of professional recon you can execute today to start moving toward it?
This has been From Dorms to Desks, job hunting tips for those early in their careers, a podcast brought to you by College Recruiter job search site, which believes that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. Each episode, we dive into tips, tricks, and insights that will help you land your next part-time, seasonal, internship, or entry-level job. Subscribe to this podcast for free now, so you don't miss an episode, and visit www.collegerecruiter.com to find your next great job.